Welcome to Market Week in Review for the week ending April 9th, 2021. I'm your host, Laura Bardowick, and today I'm joined by Chief Investment Strategist, Eric Ristabin. Eric, thank you so much for joining us today.
Good morning.
Good morning. So, Eric, the three stories I was hoping we could touch on this week are economic data releases, Powell's comments, and then take a look at Greenland. Let's go ahead and start from the top there. Key economic data releases this week. What should investors be paying attention to?
Well, I think the broad story is the idea that the economy is recovering both here and in Europe, notably, just in terms of the data that we've seen this week, is continuing. There's a lot of positive data that's coming out. I can kind of give examples. The European services sector actually is almost above 50 now. It's still weaker than the manufacturing. The manufacturing had a blowout number of over 62. Which is a record in terms of how quickly the manufacturing sector in Europe is going. Services are behind, and that shouldn't surprise people because you've had a lot of difficulty in the vaccine. The reopening of those economies hasn't been going as smoothly as they would like. On the kind of the positive side there, though, is that you're seeing real momentum in the vaccine effort. I think recently this week, I think Germany actually hit 700,000 shots a day. Which is, showing incredible improvement from where they were. So I think you're beginning to see this reopening trade not just being anticipated, but to actually being occurring. The U.S. numbers are strong, too. In fact, the services sector in the U.S. Was around 60. That's the highest number we've seen there since, for 6 years. So that I think gives you an idea that maybe vaccination efforts and reopening efforts are going a little better here than they are in Europe. But it's important for people to realize the economy is getting better. On the kind of negative side of the equation, just to remind us that nothing is completely done yet. We had a jobless claims number that was higher than expected of about 744,000. Jobless claims last week. So, there's an ebbing and throwing, and there's, still quite a bit of volatility within the economy and the markets, and certainly across sectors. But generally, we got confirmation that things are getting better.
Good. So a light at the end of the tunnel, but we still have a ways to go, it sounds like.
We still do, yeah.
On the topic of data releases, obviously another important indicator is what comes out of the Fed. So can you detail some of Powell's comments and highlight some key takeaways?
Over the last month, the interest rates in the United States have not risen all that much. They're fairly flat over the last month. You go back to the beginning of the year, however, and they're up steeply. The 10-year rate, the 30-year rate, they're all up from where they were at the beginning of the year. And there's a lot of consternation and concern that perhaps inflation was going to be a huge issue. And all those economic numbers we just talked about would create excess demand for goods and services, and that would then beget inflation. And perhaps maybe that meant the Fed would be moving earlier in terms of tightening than was initially anticipated. And now, Chairman Powell and all the members of the Fed have been extraordinarily consistent that they're not going to do that, right? They want to see actual inflation. I think what he said yesterday that was really important for the market to hear was that he talked about last month's job creation number, which was just shy of 1 million. And if you looked at the revisions, it was actually over 1 million in terms of the positive number of jobs added. And then he said, we would like to see 6 straight months of 1 million jobs creation. So what I think he was telling the market is really good jobs numbers are not a concern of theirs. In fact, it's their objective. People know that the Fed has an inflation mandate to control inflation. That is the most important part of their mandate. But their dual mandate, the second part of the dual mandate, is full employment. And I think he's strongly signaling to the market that they don't see inflation as an issue now and unlikely to be an issue for the next year or so. And they're going to the whip on jobs, full employment. And then he said, and we mean by 1 million jobs created every month. That is a tremendous number of jobs being created. So I think the market took solace in that. And the interesting thing is today we saw a purchasing a price index number that was high. So, maybe you would think in the kind of the context of what was happened so far this year that people would see that higher inflation number in the purchasing prices and say, oh my God, inflation is going to be a problem, and you drive up rates. 10-year rates haven't moved at all. And I think part of that is One, the market kind of has inflation expectations now that are reasonable, where at the beginning of the year they were unreasonably low. And I think the Fed Chairman Powell's comments yesterday actually helped the market realize that probably wasn't going to force the Fed to move anytime soon.
Well, I'm sure it's going to be a hot topic for many weeks going forward, nonetheless.
I think it'll be the topic for the next year or so, yeah.
Very probably, yes. We've talked a lot about the US so far, so let's go hop back on a global note. Greenland, in particular, a lot of world powers have an eye for Greenland, and some recent developments there have made headlines. Can you talk a little bit to these and what's going on?
Yeah, Greenland's been coming up a lot lately. The Trump administration, President Trump was seriously asking whether we could buy Greenland, which may sound ambitious, but Louisiana purchase and Alaska all came to us in purchases. So it's not radically different than what's happened in the past, but what happened this week is that there was an election in Greenland. Now, Greenland has been kind of moving towards independence. Technically, it's a province of Denmark, and gets a good fair amount of aid from Denmark. With the climate getting warmer, the ice is melting on Greenland, which is actually making mining a more reasonable effort. And in particular, Greenland evidently has the second largest deposits of rare earth in the world outside of China. China dominates the rare earth supply, both the within their domestic borders, but also kind of globally. And China actually was actually supporting a project to do a major rare earth mining effort in Greenland, along with an Australian company. That project now has been put in jeopardy because of this election, because the Inuit population, the party who lives mostly in Greenland, are the people who've lived there for millennia. They're very, very sensitive to climate change. And the environmental impact of what might happen in a mining thing. So the project's probably in trouble, but it gives you a sense of the competing powers, particularly the U.S. and China, that are competing for influence and frankly, strategic assets in Greenland. And it just is another, kind of reminder that although maybe the style difference between the Biden and Trump's administration as relates to China will be different, the substance of the policy is not that different, and it's not likely to be that different. If you talk to political strategists who really study Washington, like the one area of bipartisan kind of agreement is China. So, I think that is a reminder of that tension still exists. It's not going to go away because of a new administration. It's going to last for a very long time, likely. And it still remains and will continue to remain kind of one of the major geopolitical risks to the market that exists out there. And that's just something we're going to have to live with. But it was just another reminder this week, and I'm sure there'll be more.
Oh, yes, I'm sure there will be plenty more, and we will continue to provide those updates in these Market Week in Reviews. But for today, that's all the time we have. Eric, thank you for joining us, and thank you all for joining us as well. We hope you have a great week until we see you next time.
Hi, I'm Eric Risteman, Chief Investment Strategist for Russell Investments. If you like what you saw in this video and want to see more like it, please subscribe to our YouTube channel.